Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. Well, we're in a series inspired by the hymn that we just heard a verse of a moment ago called "To Be Your Presence." And the final verse says, "We are your heart, O Christ, your hands and voice. To serve your people is our call and choice, and in this mission we, the church, rejoice." Alleluia. The series is about how we are God's presence as Christians and how we can offer our heart, hands, and voice to God's mission to serve God's people. And who are God's people? It's not just those we share our faith with or things in common with. Every human being is a child of God, worthy of God's love and our love. And that fundamental care for every person is an expression of compassion, which also comes up in that same hymn. To be your presence is our mission here, to show compassion's face and listening ear, to be your heart of mercy ever near. Alleluia. How is God calling you to show compassion? By the way that you live and share with others. That's the question at the heart of today's message. A number of you have indicated how difficult this past week has been for you, and a lot of us have profound reflections on what the future may hold. Anytime we work, pray, and hope for a good outcome, and that does not come to pass, it's difficult. When we follow our passion and express compassion, it opens us up to the additional pain that comes when we experience a loss or rejection of any kind. That kind of pain can cause us to go into a kind of self-protection mode, which is appropriate for a moment. But whatever your thoughts and emotions are today, our mission and calling remain unchanged. We are called to be God's heart, hands, and voice. We're to show compassion's face and listening ear. Some of us wear our compassion on our sleeves in our relationships. Others may have a stoic gene or two and channel our compassion into work that supports people and makes them feel valued and cared for. I appreciated Becky's reflections earlier in the video during the welcome. Finding community and a sense of belonging is so important. And our society has been through a period of transition, not only because of the pandemic, but there has been a shift away from participating in community and public organizations for a period of decades, and the pandemic accelerated that for some. But now more than ever, it's time for us to make a commitment to community, and perhaps things are starting to shift. If you've been on the margins or on the edge of involvement, now may be the time to involve yourself more fully. And of course, I believe All Saints offers opportunities to find that belonging, and we have things to offer. I mean, just take a look at everything happening this week. But there's really been a movement among many in the church in the United States back to emphasizing discipleship over membership. As a member, you get certain benefits. You take advantage of what's offered. But as a disciple, we're called to invest. We're called to build and support the community we seek, to create relationships, groups, and experiences that provide meaning and hope for ourselves and others. We have to be the builders of what we yearn for, and it's important to find our own unique way of expressing compassion and care for one another and helping to create space for others. There are as many ways to show compassion as there are personalities and people. But today I invite you to reflect on what you care about. Are there situations that inspire you to act and make an impact in someone's life? Are there situations in the world or broader community that bother you? All of that may point toward a new sense of purpose or calling. We can take the energy and motivation from that to step out and do something positive that helps bring compassion to a neighbor in need. I want All Saints to be a place where, as we share where our compassion is leading us, we will find others who want to join with us in making an impact, and ultimately we can join together as a congregation in addressing some of those priorities. In one of his letters from prison, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, "Action springs not from thought, but from a readiness for responsibility." If you truly have a heart for something, maybe you're ready to take responsibility, to say, "Here I am, Lord." If so, let's be in conversation about how we can channel our hopes and concerns into action that will bring direct results in the lives of people in this community. Those may be individual efforts, or they could grow into something more. So I want to pivot to the gospel reading we heard earlier because I think it speaks to this question about finding our heart of compassion both within and as we notice the world around us. Today's gospel has us seated alongside Jesus and his disciples, looking across to the temple treasury in Jerusalem, and you can almost visualize the scene. The Temple Mount had various areas that limited access, and with each new area, fewer and fewer people were allowed in. And the outermost area was the court of Gentiles, which welcomed those who were not part of the faith. And further inside was the court of women, which was where the temple treasury was actually located. That's the scene of the story we heard earlier. It was just outside of the final gate that brought you face to face with the temple itself. Author Sung Soo Hong envisions the setting according to accounts from the first century historian Josephus. Jesus is sitting down with his disciples in the court of the women at the temple, looking at the exceedingly beautiful and lofty columns that Josephus described. This incredible wonder of the ancient world, with final touches by Herod at the start of the first century, represented immense wealth. It's in this court that people are depositing gifts into the treasury, and among them are some who, as we heard, are quite wealthy. But Jesus asks his disciples to observe more closely and take note of one person in particular, a widow who is poor and has deposited just 2 small coins. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." I think it's important for us to practice this same type of observation today. What might draw most people's attention are those who are celebrated and honored, but Jesus looks deeper. We live in a culture that more than ever values spectacle. And unless something is dramatic and packaged perfectly, nobody really fully listens or pays attention. And yet we're called to look deeper and to consider the lilies, as Jesus said, to consider the lives of those who live off stage more and live ordinary, dedicated lives themselves. In this gospel story, Jesus criticizes leaders for devouring the houses of widows. And at that time in Israel, the poor were not traditionally expected to give, but we assume from his words that there was some kind of pressure or expectation being applied. And he says, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets." When Jesus contrasts the widow's incredible act of generosity with the relatively small contributions of others, he's making a point. Generosity is not about the sum total. Generosity is reflected by your capacity on one hand and what you do. Though the face value of her offering was small, her generosity was exponentially larger in comparison. Her heart is big. Although Jesus uses her offering as an opportunity to drive home the potential injustice of what's happening, he also honors her. To view her gift only as unfair strips away her strength and the force of her actions. She demonstrates a depth of faith and hope that is inspiring. Generosity is at its core both an expression of faith and hope. When we feel uncertain and threatened, it's a common instinct to withdraw and to hold on to what we have more tightly. But generosity is an act of defiance. It's like the famous quote from Martin Luther when he was asked what he would do if he knew the world was ending tomorrow. He replied, "Plant a tree." It's an act of defiance. It's a statement to ourselves and the world that we're not giving up or giving in. To foster healthy communities and healthy spirits, we need to find ways of expressing generosity and gratitude, whatever that looks like, in our relationships or our investments in common life. This widow had just 2 coins. Imagine her world. Imagine what life must have been like. But whatever was happening around her, her gift was an expression of defiance. Generosity combats feelings of scarcity and fear. Sometimes, though, fear dominates in the presence of scarcity, real or imagined, and it can overtake a community or a whole society. On this very morning, it so happens, November 10th, in 1938, people in Germany woke up to the aftermath of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. It was a turning point in Nazi Germany. On that night and into the next day, 267 synagogues were burned to the ground. 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses were destroyed and looted, with the glass windows being shattered. 91 people were murdered, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps, and we know what would eventually happen to them. It was a defining escalation in what would become known as the Holocaust, and already by that time, people had become impervious to things like this. They had just come to accept it as the new normal. Many Christians stood by and watched and said nothing. In one historic photo from that morning, a couple is walking by a Jewish storefront that has shattered glass, and they are smiling. Not only do they appear fine with the events, but they seem to be sharing a moment of perceived triumph over people they deem to be the enemy. The world, including the US, fought the Second World War over the ideological movement that led to that. Fascism, among other features, views some as superior and others as effectively subhuman. It aligns with massive wealth to feed corruption and consolidate resources to those who are deemed more deserving. It utilizes fear and division to gain support. Any ideology that is built on fear and that seeks to amplify it is contrary to Christian faith and the practice of generosity, which hopes and trusts and which seeks to do good, regardless of whether good things come back to you. Generosity in every form, whether it's relational, financial, or social, is an antidote to fear. It's a spiritual practice and a communal practice that helps build hope. And so we have this remarkable example of the widow. As Jesus does so often in the Gospels, he notices and elevates those who are on the margins, those who would otherwise go unnoticed, and he teaches his disciples to learn from them, to value them, to love and defend them. The kingdom belongs to such as these. Perhaps today, for any number of reasons, your heart feels small or fragile. Perhaps it's in pain or numbed by uncertainties or worries. Know that God's compassion, demonstrated in the life of Jesus, is very clear. It's a compassion that is shared with you and for you today. May you find comfort in God's compassion that has known pain and inspiration in the widow's heart, which leads with courage, dignity, and hope. Find your heart of compassion and plant a tree. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.